Welcome to another coffee break. Before we get started, I'll point out really fast just a shout out to my little sister Emily for letting me set up in her room. But that's everything you're seeing behind me. It's my little sister's stuff, so she's pretty cool for letting me use this. It's the only quiet place in the house right now. And with that, let's just get into it. This week we're going to be talking about retro gaming. And just sort of what's involved with that, how to go about playing retro games, and if there's sort of any stigmas surrounding playing retro games. And one thing I wanted to start out with actually was just to ask you, Janet, if you thought that there was sort of, I guess, like a split in like gamers, people who play retro games, people who don't play retro games, and if there's any sort of judgment or bias going on between the groups.
Yeah, I would think at this point, it's kind of strange because, I think the only people that haven't played what we would consider retro games, which I think is really anything before the PS2 era, or maybe even PS1, those are definitely older games, but I think when we think retro, we think, NES, SNES, early iterations of Sega, things like that. So it's weird because I think most gamers are of the age where they would have played retro games, just naturally having grown up. Like myself, I started out with the SNES Junior. That was my first system that I owned. But I think there's definitely the feeling that you have to have played some of those old retro games in order to not necessarily be accepted in the community, but I think it's kind of like something you have to know. It's almost like the standard of gaming is that you had to have played some of these old games. And I think it'd be a little weird if you hadn't had that experience. So I think it's kind of tough to say because I did grow up gaming right away. So I think if you didn't, it's just I think you're just missing a lot of things just in learning how to game or learning the kind of where the roots of the mechanics come from, how we I guess it's kind of not knowing your history that well. Yeah, so I don't think gamers necessarily, I would hope that gamers don't hold that against people, but I think if you're into games and you like talking to people at a slightly higher than casual level of gaming, if you're in game journalism or you do streams and things like that, you have to have had that background because it's just going to help you talk about the games and then also connect to things. I mean, if you didn't play retro games, you wouldn't really understand the significance of, the ukulele release that's coming up. You wouldn't really understand what My Number 9 means in the scheme of gaming history. So I think there can be some stigma if you haven't had those experiences. But I think more than anything, it's just important to have them. They're kind of, I would say they're necessary.
Right. Yeah, I think that's interesting what you say about knowing your history, and how that's important to people who like to game. And I definitely, up to a certain point in my life, I felt fairly well educated on video games. I felt like I sort of had a good foundation under me because I grew up with I played Donkey Kong and stuff on the Super Nintendo, and I had the Sega. I got that for Christmas one year when I was a kid, and I loved that. And I had, the original, Game Boy and everything. Although at the same time, even when I had all those things, I feel like I don't really have as good of a background as a lot of other people do. So, even though I've played Mario, Super Mario, I never really, I haven't gone through, all the games or anything. I don't have all of them. I just recently got the Nintendo 3DS version, of the original Super Mario Land. I think that's the one. And I've been playing through it, and I've been enjoying it a lot. But and some of it's stuff that I played as a kid. But as I was playing through, I was sort of wondering, if it's weird that I'm playing this on the 3DS. That it's kind of strange. I wonder if that takes away from the experience at all. Because I was sort of thinking if as I was playing this, if anyone would be sort of judging me for playing on the 3DS, it's not the same experience. So if later someone's like, oh, have you played Super Mario Land? I'm like, yeah, I beat it, recently or whatever. Does that count as the same amount as having beat it when it was, on whatever console it was originally released for? So that's an interesting question for me, and I guess that's sort of what I was thinking about when we were coming up with this topic was sort of how I felt a little judged because I always assume everyone's judging me before they actually judge me because that's how I live my life. It's really unproductive. But I felt a little bit of that same feeling when I was reading Ready Player One. Once, I don't know if you've ever heard of that book before, but it's basically this dystopian style book mixed with video games, so what's not to love. And there's a whole bunch of gaming history in there, and the whole premise sort of follows knowing all the details and being like a master at these really old games in order to like win in the video game universe that they have set up in the book. And I learned a lot from reading that, and I also felt so unknowledgeable. So it was another time where I felt a little judged, even though no one was judging me. I was reading a book, you know, so I just prejudged myself. Yeah, but that's sort of where I'm at with the whole issue.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good kind of segue into the other thing that we want to talk about, which was not only like should you play retro games, but how should you experience those games. So you bring up, and I know like recently the Nintendo eShop has opened up like a bunch of these old games from like I think they go as far back as the SNES. I don't know if they go to the NES. I'm not sure. I know there's definitely a lot of Game Boy games that are now on the 3DS, which can make some sense because they're all handhelds from Nintendo. But yeah, I think I wouldn't say I judge you for playing. Which game is it? Which Super Mario game? Right. I don't think I'd say I'd judge you for playing Super Mario Land on the 3DS, but I find it like weird and it like makes me uncomfortable. I don't, I have like, and I'm trying to figure out for myself like what are my feelings towards this, because I've played Majora's Mask on the 3DS, the new kind of version that came out for it. Though that's also different because it's like a new version. Like there's different things. Like that gaming experience is extremely different from the original. You know, just the fact that you have the two screens. I think in the original you had to kind of just know the songs that you play. You didn't have like them saved, you know, the same way. So it's kind of easier of a game and things like that. So it's definitely a different experience, but I'm okay with that. I don't exactly know why I'm okay with it, but I just kind of, I think maybe also the fact that it's a physical copy makes it feel like it's okay. It's more okay because it's like, at least it's real. I really don't like the new, how you can buy those old games on like the Game Boy. On the 3DS. It's just kind of, it's just weird. Like that's like not what it was. And I don't know how else to explain it other than that. I played Super Mario Land 2 recently, on the Game Boy Color, because I recently got a Game Boy Color and I played that. And that was great. And I think, I don't know, there's just something about, I feel like if you're playing a retro game, I think we need to think about why do we play retro games. So to me, like one reason I play retro games is to kind of either get in touch with a history that I'm not fully familiar with and experience it because I've heard a lot about it and I want to know it. Or I play it to kind of go back in time and re-experience something that I experienced as a kid. So when I played Super Mario Land 2, it was very much me playing a game that I loved as a kid and I wanted to play it again. And I did, and it was really hard at the very end, and I beat it, and it was great, and it was wonderful, and I loved having that experience on the Game Boy Color, specifically. I would not like that experience as much on the 3DS, because it just doesn't have the same mechanic or the same feel, like, it's more comfortable to hold, like, it's kind of that old, some of the archaic things that are kind of wrong, I think, in retro gaming, where it's like, if we made a console or made a game, we wouldn't make it the same way, is also part of the experience, so I feel like it depends on what your motivation for the game. Like, do you just want to play the game at its kind of highest form, or what's most convenient, or what makes the most sense for you, like fiscally and like accessibility, or do you want to have like the full experience? And I think if you want to have the full experience, you have to play it on the original.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and I got a sense for that while I was playing, which was sort of why I brought it up, is that I was thinking like, you know, this can't really be the same thing as playing on the Game Boy. And I have a vague memory of playing on the Game Boy when I was a kid, because I had it on my Game Boy. But you know, I don't really remember what it's like to play it, because I probably have it in the garage somewhere, but that's a lost cause. So I was like, I felt really aware of how different the game was from the platform. Which was a little bit strange. But at the same time, I don't know, it's kind of interesting to me where I can sort of access a lot of my childhood memories more easily on the 3DS than I could otherwise, because I don't have my Game Boy Color anymore, because, you know, what happened in my family, there's 6 kids, so, you know, once I got my DS, I had to give my Game Boy Color, at that point, when my Game Boy Advanced, you know, or whatever. So I guess when I got my Game Boy Advanced, I had to give my Game Boy Color to my little sisters. and so on. When I got my DS, I had to give my Game Boy Advance to my little sisters, and they would always destroy them. So like I'd always like take really good care of it because I loved it, and then like I'd pass it on down, and next thing I know, it's got like water stains under the screen, and like it dropped like a freaking million times, and I'm like, what are you doing? You know, and they're like, why are you upset? You know, it's not yours anymore. And here I am as a 22-year-old thinking, man, if only they hadn't ruined my Game Boy. You know, I could go back and play my games on the Game Boy. So I like though that I can. I played some games, you know, on my DS. I was kind of interested to see when I was in the eShop the other day that they had the original Pokemon games, and I thought about it, you know. But right now I'm playing Pokemon at the newer age anyway, so I don't have time. But I think there's some level of positive. There's some level of positivity from the accessibility, I guess, of the games now, because it's nice to be able to usher in even a new generation of players, because there's so many people who are younger than us that I think would really enjoy the original Pokemon games or even like Super Mario games or whatever, that really can't access it as easily if it's not on the newer systems.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I never really thought of it that way. I guess it's like you, I guess like it's like a you can but should you kind of thing. And yeah, fiscally it definitely makes the most sense. I never thought about that part. But yeah, like I also, just to kind of, this is slightly off topic, but I feel like it's important to say, don't buy the original Pokemon on the 3DS. It's going to be awful.
Okay, yeah.
It doesn't age well at all. It's a horrible game. I've played it recently, and everyone's going to be angry, and I don't care. It's awful. It's like, you know how Pokemon's slow paced? Imagine like Molasses slow, way less regions to explore. It's just like, it's come so far in a great way. But because I bought it for the Game Boy Color, mainly, honestly, most of the reason I bought it was because I was playing Donkey Kong Land, and it has a yellow cartridge, and everyone was always like, are you playing Pokemon? And I'm like, no, I'm playing Donkey Kong. And I got sick of people asking, so I just bought a Pokemon game. And then I'm like, this is going to be awesome. I'm so excited. I played it. I hate it. It's awful. It's so slow paced. But I'm like playing through it just to kind of like, just to say that I like played it again. I don't know. It's like, it's weird. Retro gaming is odd because a lot of it is, I mentioned this the other day on, I think on my Twitter page, but I was like, when it comes to retro games and arcade games, I'm always wondering, like, is this game, like, poorly, like, made, or is it just, am I just bad at it? I think there's also, like, a little bit of, like, I don't know what, like, a good word for this in English would be, but, like, the machismo, you know, which is, like, it's a Spanish term for, like, you know, trying to be the bravado, the machoism, the, like, oh, check out how strong I am, or look at what I can do, I'm better than you type thing.
Right.
I think there's some machismo for gaming, especially when it comes to retro games, like, oh, you don't know, like, you didn't play through Earthworm Jim, so, like, you don't have the same skill level, or, like, you don't understand, like, there's, like, a lot of stigma with these newer games, because they're, like, easier, there's easy mode, medium mode, hard mode, and people are like, oh, no, they should just be hard, and, like, now you pay your money, and you just get to the end of the game, and it, like, should have, like, this inherent struggle in it, and I feel like that's not, like, I don't know, I think a lot of these games, these retro games, it's, like, they also don't really age very well, so, like, sometimes, like, you know, you go into the past and then you realize this was horrible, which is a lot of history. So it's definitely a strange place.
Yeah, I think that might just be human nature, because then you always hear, like, you know, the older generation, you always hear the stereotype of, like, well, when I was a kid, we had to walk, you know, 3 miles in the snow, you know, to get to school or whatever. And, like, but people love to talk about how much harder their life is than your life. Always. It doesn't matter what it's about, you know. I do it all the time because, again, I have 3 little sisters. So anytime they're like complaining about their homework, I'm like, well, you don't understand because I was in 8 more clubs than you. I don't know why I do it. I know it's obnoxious, but I keep doing it. I'm gonna keep doing it, most likely. And I think it's the same for games, you know. So, and I guess I probably do that with games too, to some extent. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little snobby. But it's probably accurate. I do this about myself. I don't know why I'm surprised. Even like with games, like I guess I really hold on to the stuff that I do have. So even though I get annoyed if someone else called me out for not having as much of a retro background as they do, you know, I would turn around and do the same thing to someone else who hasn't played the games that I grew up with and loved. And I know I've done this to you too. Like if we talk about Resident Evil or something, I'm like, Resident Evil, you have to play Resident Evil, even though they're pretty awful. But especially the old games, you know, like the original one I played on like the PlayStation, the director's cut, the one that I ran away from the first zombie, you know, 5 minutes into the game, every time for the first 1,000 times I played it, like that, for me is like this experience that I hold on to, and I kind of judge everyone else for not having the experience. And it leads back to sort of my original belief about people in general, which is why I'm always prejudging myself, is because I'm always judging everyone else. So I know everyone else has to be doing it to me. And it carries over into games like everything else in my life and my psychological messed upness. Yeah, I don't know. That's a bigger problem than this video has time to get into, for sure.
Yeah, definitely winding down here, but I think just to kind of add in some final points, and then you can have like your half or your say. I think I like what you brought up about like wanting people, like kind of pushing your experience onto people and like wanting them to have it. I was thinking about this a lot with like yesterday. I was doing some sketching just for fun, and I thought I'd do some video game quotes, some hand lettering of video game quotes, and I was looking up ones from Jack and Daxter, and then I rewatched the opening scene to make sure I got the quote right. And when I was rewatching the opening scene, I'm like, man, I just want to like play. I didn't really want to necessarily play the game again because I just played through the trilogy like a year ago, and it was really hard. I don't want to do it again, but I'm like, man, I just want to watch someone play. Like I want like the next human that enters my life needs to play this, and I need to watch the whole thing. And I felt like just like very connected to this game. And I think that's where like this like why a lot of people in the community I think would have strong feelings for like the way you experience a retro game, because it's like it's so much more than like the actual game. Like, you know, we can port things all the time, and we do because we have the technology, and that's great, but it's also like I guess whenever we gain something we lose something.
Yeah.
And I think what we lose is like the specific experiences that were had when we were kids, or whenever we played the game, because you can play it when you're older. So like, you know, the you know, I played Mario 64 on the DS when it came out, and I did not like it because, well, one, they started you off as Yoshi, and you could like wear a Mario hat and become Mario. I don't understand why that was done. I'm still upset about it. It makes no sense. But yeah, it just wasn't the same. And then I rebought it for the N64 now that I'm collecting old systems, and it's just not like, it's like such a different experience. Like it looks grittier, which is like part of, you know, it's all like part of like what that experience was. So I think part of the reason that like people get upset with these emulators or those weird consoles that are like, you can buy those consoles now that are like several consoles in one console. Like you can
play, my brother has that.
Games, yeah. And like, yeah, right. And they're convenient for like just going through the games, but it's also like, I guess it's not. I guess a lot of people feel, and I feel like it's not really the full experience unless it has all those components to it.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of where I stand on that.
Yeah, you know, and I have to agree. I think it's best to experience it in the original form. But I would have to say, just sort of to end us off, I guess I feel pretty proud of the gaming industry and the gaming community for sort of allowing growth, though, because I think even though we're kind of all obsessed with the games we grew up with, or the old games, or people who are even older than us, you know, have more experience with the really old stuff, we're still growing as an industry. And we're coming out with so much new cool stuff all the time, and it's like the exact opposite of what we see in a lot of other fields. So like in literature, you know, we don't always get as much, like there's a difference between like the canon, you know, the old stuff and the new stuff, and usually people think, if they're scholars of things, they're sort of thinking of contemporary stuff as being bad. I think we have really the opposite in video games, and part of it is because our technology's gotten so much better. But, you know, I'm proud of us for being able to move on and not live too much in the past.
Yep, just enough.